Good afternoon. All right, so this always happens in this room, that like 2/3 of the people sit on this half, and thank you to the 1/3 of you sitting over there. But if you need a little bit of room, feel free to take some seats over there and spread out a little bit. We have plenty of room. We also have a good crowd, which we're thrilled about. Welcome to the afternoon session of the NCVS at 50, or as we're informally calling it, the morning session was the wedding, this is the reception. I want to say I said everything I have to say this morning. A couple of things. First, but I think before we kind of move into the afternoon session, we wanted to show another video, one that we did not have a chance to show this morning, and I want to give it a proper introduction, which means I have to find the right piece of paper. All right. Okay, so we have this, to start the afternoon session, we have a video message from the Honorable Jim Costa, who represents the San Joaquin Valley that makes up the 21st Congressional District of California. In the 118th Congress, Congressman Costa serves on the House Committees on Agriculture and Foreign Affairs. A little bit more relevant to the NCVS. He is the co-chair or co-founder of several congressional caucuses. Among them, he is the co-chair and the co-founder of the Crime Survivors and Justice Caucus, which has initiated and supported federal legislation that improves victims' rights and services. Representative Costa has worked diligently to protect federal funds that are designated to aid victims and survivors of crimes, and his efforts have been recognized by the National Organization for Victim Assistance. And the technology will now let you see the video from Representative Costa.
Hello, I'm Congressman Jim Costa, and as a co-founder and current co-chair of the Bipartisan Crime Survivors and Justice Caucus, I really wanted to be a part of today's 50th anniversary to say thank you to each and every one of you who are in the audience, as well as all of the thousands of people who work for the Department of Justice to make America safer. And this has been occurring for obviously generations in the history of our nation. But today we talk about the importance of the 50th anniversary of the National Crime Victimization Survey that's been going on, otherwise known as NCVS, the nation's primary source of information on criminal victimization and the numbers of statistics that are so critical to combating crime throughout our country. Since 1973, the data that has been gathered in this survey has been used to report crime rates and to show the changes in those crime rates across our country as a way to determine how can we do a better job of making our neighborhoods safer. The Bipartisan Safer Communities Act, and had bipartisan support, and for good reason. It remains the priority of mine and I think my colleagues who support this investment to ensure that we do everything we possibly can to reduce crime in America and to make our neighborhoods safer. It's that simple. Each and every one of you work so hard. Most of you have dedicated your lives to the Department of Justice and the hard work you do throughout our country. And let me say thank you. Thank you, and thank you so very much for the good work that you do. It's important. And so therefore, the 50th anniversary really allows us to, in fact, have a ability to measure our success. Let me also give a shout out to not only the employees and the leaders, but Dr. Kevin Scott, who does such an important role with the Bureau of Justice Statistics. All of you make a difference, and I'm here to say thank you. Okay? So keep up the good work, all of you. Congratulations on 50 years of success. And obviously, as the co-chair of this important caucus, it's important that we continue to work together because America deserves to have the safest neighborhoods we can possibly achieve for all the right reasons. Thank you.
So the plan this afternoon is to take this opportunity to do a little bit of a deep dive into the NCVS. And we've envisioned this as kind of two different panel presentations. The first panel presentation will be on innovations in the NCVS.
Thank you to each and every one of you who are in the audience, as well as all.
So the first panel will be a panel on the NCVS innovations. The panel will be moderated by Heather Brazos, who is the Deputy Director of Statistical Operations at BJS, and until July was the Chief of the Victimization Statistics Unit at BJS, and so knows the NCVS very well. Please welcome Heather.
Okay, where are my panelists? You guys want to come up and join me up here? All right, well, you are coming up to the stage. Thank you, Kevin. The inspiration for this session comes from a Grace Hopper quote. Grace Hopper, as many of you may know, was a pioneer of computer programming and a Rear Admiral in the U.S. Navy. She is credited with saying that the most dangerous phrase in the English language is, well, we've always done it this way. We've always done it this way. That is a phrase that I have not once heard from the NCVS team. Over the years, statisticians, researchers, and analysts working on the NCVS have continued to push the boundaries of survey design and measurement. And so for this session, channeling that sentiment, we are here to explore and discuss NCVS innovations. We have 4 esteemed panelists with us here today. We have David Cantor, a senior fellow at WestStat, Janet Lauritsen, a distinguished professor from the University of Missouri St. Louis, Jim Lynch, another distinguished professor and former BJS director from University of Maryland, and Jenna Truman, a statistician on the NCVS team at the Bureau of Justice Statistics. You can read more about each of them in the event program. I'm going to begin with some questions for our panelists, but we'd really like to get your questions out of this session. So there's microphones set up around the room that you can queue up to if you have a question to ask. When you come up, please state your name, where you're from, what your question is, and who it's directed at. We can also accept questions through the chat feature for our virtual attendees, and we will have those read to us as they come through so that we can work them into the discussion. So with that, let's kick it off with a question for Jenna. Jenna, the NCVS is going through a major redesign of the survey instrument. Can you tell us exactly what this is and why it's important?
Thank you, Heather. BJS has initiated a multi-year effort to improve the efficiency, reliability, and utility of the NCVS. There are multiple kind of goals of these efforts. In particular, we wanted to modernize the organization and content of the NCVS instrument, increase the quality of information that was collected, also increase the efficiency and flow throughout the instrument, and improve the measurement and classification of crime. So this involved redesigning the entire instrument, which includes both a household roster, a victimization screener, and a crime incident report, or CIR for short. The new instrument does maintain the two-stage measurement approach, so we screening on victimization and then classifying the victimization with the crime incident report. It does feature updated crime screening questions to improve the quality of information and measure crimes better. And then additional updates include using behaviorally specific language and expanding specifically screening probes for rape and sexual assault. We've also added vandalism as a new crime screener that we're not currently measuring today. The crime incident report updates include revising things to improve the measurement of key NCVS concepts, including presence during the incident, as well as location of the incident. And also, very importantly, expanding measures of victim experiences, including victim services use, police reporting, satisfaction with police, and consequences of victimization. The redesign effort is very important to the NCVS and to BJS. It really modernizes the NCVS and increases the relevance of the data. And really, we've all kind of know and have learned throughout this morning and throughout the history of BJS and the NCVS that is really crucial to understanding criminal victimization in the United States. And these updates will really improve our efforts to measure victimization better, as well as continue to enhance and expand all of the information that we can learn about victimization.
All right, and one of the biggest changes in this new instrument is within the rape and sexual assault module. David, can you tell us a little bit about what makes this particularly challenging, this type of crime particularly challenging to measure?
Sure. I wasn't expecting that question, but I'll do my best. There's a long history on measuring rape and sexual assault, starting with Koss's work in the early 1980s, and Kirkpatrick and Jaden and Tony's, Krebs et al., Fisher and Cullen in the 1990s, and then more recent work by RTI and Westat. So there's been a lot of work done on measuring rape and sexual assault, and one of the key things we tried to do was try to update the measure that the NCVS currently has. So the main challenges that we were faced with was how to word those initial screening questions. How do you define what should be an RSA for the NCVS, and the methods used to conduct the survey. So in terms of the screening questions, question wording for the screening questions obviously are really important. Research has found that being as explicit as possible is really important to try to make sure the respondent understands what you're asking about. The initial redesign, the 92 redesign of the NCVS tried to shift a lot of the screening questions from legal terminology to more behavioral terminology, but it didn't quite get there with the rape and sexual assault questions. It still includes, for example, a phrase in there about whether they had been raped or sexually assaulted. So what we tried to do was to adopt the strategy that has been found to work as the best way possible, behavior-specific questions. And these have been found to work better in probably one of the most defining studies. I think it was funded by BJS and maybe a joint funding with NIJ, was the Fisher and Cullen study that compared the NCVS screening items to a BSQ approach, and they found a rate of about 10 times higher. And so we wanted to try to move towards that kind of terminology. Second issue is with classifying incidents as rape and sexual assault. One of the things that critics of the BSQ approach have made is that it's not really collecting data that's comparable to what the NCVS wants, which are things that are legally defined as a rape or sexual assault. So for defining what a crime is, it has to do with the detailed incident form, of course. And so when asking about completed incidents, that's not as much of an issue as attempted or threatened incidents. So for completed incidents, you have to ask questions about whether they've been physically assaulted or if they were incapacitated and couldn't consent. Those, they're not straightforward questions, but at least there are fairly well-defined criteria. But things like attempts and threats are more difficult because they're much more contextual. So if someone's walking down the street and gets harassed, they're obviously going to be threatened, and they would answer a question about a threat in a very understandable, yes, I was threatened kind of way. But from a legal point of view, unless there's an imminent threat of danger, then it really isn't a crime. So we tried to add some questions to try to parse that out as part of the detailed incident form. The third challenge of the survey instrument, and it's something that we couldn't really quite address in the NCVS because it's sort of a structural issue, is just the overall survey environment. The NCVS is a household survey. It's an omnibus survey. It's not just asking about rape and sexual assault. And so they interview everybody in the household, and it's in person. And so that is not the most private setting in the world for questions on rape and sexual assault. So it's not unusual for other people to be present when the interview is being done. In a small apartment, for example, it's not unusual for someone to overhear. The interviewers the field representatives are trained to try to isolate people as much as possible, but that, in a practical sense, is usually not something we can push to the limit because afraid of people just refusing to do the survey. So that is sort of a remaining challenge that the NCVS probably has to deal with in the future, either going to a web survey, which is my next question. I don't want to reveal anything, and then or using some sort of self-administration for the NCVS.
Thanks, David. As you saw in the video this morning, this is not the first time that the NCVS instrument has been redesigned. Jim, can you tell us a little bit about the 92 redesign and any lessons learned that are applicable as we go through this redesign currently?
I hope this thing's on. They had, let me say something about the redesign itself, which is old people get to ruminate, so I'm going to ruminate in the sense that this was an incredibly exciting set of, and Dave may concur, but it was a consortium of research organizations, RTI, NORC, the Census Bureau was a partner in that as well, Bureau of Social Science Research. So they had some of the really top people in this field, and two people particularly is Al Bitterman and Al Reese were both who did the early surveys, and so they were coming back to this early surveys and sort of re-examining the idea of how do you elicit completely, or as completely as possible, the criminal victimization experience of people. And so, and they were very, very thoughtful about it, and Steve Feinberg was there, Wes Scogan was there, Garth Taylor, there were a whole bunch of other folks, Bob Groves, Jim Lepkowski, some of the best people, and they were connected by a teleconference, which it looks like an email system now, but they called it a teleconference. And so that you could put up an idea and someone would get on, like Reese would get on and type 200 pages, in an hour, telling you what a jackass you are. And so, but it was a way to take ideas and to mature them by whipping them around a bunch of really smart people who you could not possibly afford to get in a room all together and do that kind of thing. So this was a really exciting way, because once the discussion stopped, you essentially had a paper on that thing. So Al Bitterman had a list of 100 questions he had and criticisms he had about the current redesign, and they just marched through that thing on this. So it was very exciting. I mean, I was, it was my first real job. No, my first real job was here in Justice on the 4th floor, but my second real job was with the redesign. So it was a very exciting place where a lot of ideas were whipping around, mostly centered around what David's talking about now. How do you increase the level with which people can report their victimization experience? I think that's where the real emphasis was put. And when you see the fruits of that redesign, which came, the redesign started in 1979, technically. It didn't get put into place until 1992. Census moves in geological time, but thoroughly in geological. That was the most tested set of things, and so that was an important thing there, I think, in terms of getting things into the survey. And I think in terms of lessons, so that was the reminiscence. In terms of lessons, I think that the survey has evolved somewhat over time from something that meant the preeminent purpose of it was to provide change estimates in the level and change in level of crime. That was its purpose. And that's why all that attention to short queue screening and all these other things that were developed in that consortium to a large extent. So, but gradually, I think the battle between the police and the self-report, I think, is over. Because it's no longer someone encroaching upon somebody else's territory and so on. But people have, I think, embraced the idea. I was talking to Rick Rosenfeld just before he left this morning's session, and they had the idea that these things are things to use in tandem to learn things. So the idea of complete reporting and rate estimation, I think, is sort of subsiding. And what you see in the second redesign is the addition of information on responses to victimization and on the social context of victimization. So these are things that are not victimization in themselves, but are important for policy making in many ways, in the victim services, in the police. So I think one of the things that the redesign has done is to add this information. It didn't ignore rate estimation, but it added so much more information. And I would advise that when you know, with all due respect, I would advise that you get that word out fast. You know, maybe in Just Stat, the thing that Alex sort of created here, where you short bursts of stuff saying, hey, we got this. I'm sure you have this already planned, but let me just reassert it, that because that's where the gold is in this redesign, that you emphasize that part of it. Rate estimation, you're going to have a hard time repairing a break in series. You're trying your best. I think you're doing the best with what you can. I remember Steve Feinberg said, well, how do you introduce a new survey? He said, well, you run the surveys in parallel for 5 years. It's obvious Steve never had a budget, you know, or had to deal with OMB or anybody else. So, you know, you do it as you can, you know, making the change estimates that you can, but keep that rigor. The rigor of complete reporting is what makes the survey good. It's going to be really hard to achieve, but you shouldn't abandon it, you know, because that is, and series continuity the same way. So I don't know if that's advice or just an impossible task, but that's my thought about that anyway.
All right, thank you, Jim. That's very helpful. Janet, you have written about the importance of measuring emerging crime types, such as cybercrime. Can you talk to us a little bit about what is uniquely challenging about these types of crime compared to the traditional street crimes that we are currently measuring within the NCVS? And again, any advice that you have on how to track or measure these crimes?
Sure. I think there's at least a few people in this room know that several years ago, OMB encouraged BJS and the FBI to have a panel through the National Academy of Sciences on modernizing the nation's crime statistics. And it was the work of that group that led to a thorough assessment of the state of where we are with our measures of crime. And we're all familiar here with the NCVS and the UCR NIVERS, but what the panel spent a lot of time doing is talking about how we measure things, or how we might measure things that we have never measured before or are sure how to measure. It took quite some time to do, but one of those crimes was loosely known as cybercrime. Now, what's particularly challenging about cybercrime is that the researchers in the area and the practitioners in the area don't necessarily agree or haven't come to a strong agreement about what constitutes a cybercrime, or whether cyber is simply a technique for committing another form of crime like fraud or theft or harassment. And so without a clear definition of what the phenomenon is, you have a measurement problem. That's step number one. But there are other challenges with cybercrime. The second one comes to mind is how do you count it? A single incident can have hundreds of victims, or one. It can knock out a business, it can knock out an infrastructure, it can knock out a whole community's power grid, those kinds of things. And so who is the victim and how that metric should be developed is going to require a lot of research and development work, and that's the kind of thing that the National Academy had recommended. Now, the NCVS does have the capacity through its interviews with people to talk about and find ways to measure crimes that persons experience that we would call cybercrime. There are ways to do it for crimes in which persons are the victims. If you think of financial fraud crimes and those like those. The NIVERS data, the UCR official records on this, can have some of that capacity as well. However, a lot of cybercrime isn't not just reported to the police, but if it's reported, it might not go to local police departments. It'll go to trade commissions, or it'll go to Social Security office or unemployment office and the like. So it's the UCR is not the solution here. The official records, single source of official records, are not the solution here. So what the panel recommended, that for a crime like this, and there are other crimes like this as well, and to this room, it's kind of frightening, but we recommend that we need a strong federal coordination and governance role for the development of these kinds of metrics, and we thought that BJS was the logical place to land that huge responsibility. But they are the agency that should be doing it, coordinating that work. So I've written, and so has the panel, that this kind of effort for developing measures of cybercrime should be handled by BJS, and it should be involved kind of like working groups of researchers, practitioners, and agency personnel of access to record systems, and any other experts that are, deemed relevant to have, good information about potential cybercrime data and sources and metrics for development. And it's BJS that has the careful methodologies for that kind of R&D work to get some information out on cybercrime. I just saw, though, last month, I don't know if this was intended, but the timing was great, that RTI, a third-party report, has done a basic assessment about the cybercrime landscape. It's up on the website now. I don't know if any of the authors are here in the room, but they tackle some of these issues, and it looks to me like they've begun the work for thinking about how the NCVS might be used to capture cybercrime forms from persons who experience those crimes.
If you have questions, please start moving to the microphones. We want to work those in. Go ahead.
Hi, I'm Jane Conlon, and I'm a field representative with NCVS. And I don't really have a question. I just wanted to tell you, I have been doing the redesign program since July. I took training in June and each month. And I'm so glad to hear you explain why the sex questions were so involved, because I was almost embarrassed to ask some of the things that those questions have. But now I understand, after you explained it, why it was done that way. And it's been interesting doing it, but change is good. And I understand that eventually, is this the one that's going to be? Is this the way it's going to be? The survey? The way it's written now?
Yeah, that's what you're testing. So right now we're doing a pilot test with Census, and so our FRs are collecting data through the pilot. And then next year we will start a split sample. We'll have the new and the old instrument, or the current instrument, in the field at the same time. But yeah, that will be the new instrument, the one you're testing now.
When I get these cases, they've never been done before, and yet it says it's interview number 5 or interview number 6. When they've never been. Why aren't they number 1?
Yeah, I think that was part of the rotation that we did with the sample rotating in and out, so that they weren't in the field. But yeah, I might have to get back to you on that one.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Another question over there?
Hello. So my name is Emily Moan. I work at the Census on the NCVS redesign. I have a question for you, Dave, about, you're talking about like the definition, how you guys are coming up with a definition for like the rape and sexual assault series. And I was curious because I was looking online at like what the FBI definition of rape is and how there was a change, I think it was like 2013, their old definition to this new definition. And it looks like it is slightly different from the definition you guys use. And I was just curious, I guess, about that difference, if that's going to play into how things are being categorized with this new pilot data. So like that's one part of the question, is like the actual definition of rape. And the other part is on the BJS website where we have like the definition of rape. The last sentence says that attempted rape includes verbal threats of rape, which I actually didn't know until I had read that. And I was curious, I guess, as to why that is called attempted rape versus threat of rape.
Yeah, I'll let Jenna and Heather talk about what's on the BGS website. I think there's always been some sort of discontinuity between that, that definition and what's actually used on the survey. But can you be a little more specific about how the FBI definition is different than what
Yes.
what I had explained?
I do actually I have a screenshot of it. I can read it to you. But I think part of the definition difference that is here is saying that like prior to 2013, it basically was just saying that, you know, it was the carnal knowledge of a female forcibly and against her will, which I understand why that one changed. And then it says, beginning with the year 2013, they revised the UCR definition of rape as penetration, no matter how slight, of the vagina or anus with any body part or object, or oral penetration by a sex organ of another person without the consent of the victim. And then it says attempts or assaults to commit rape are also included. However, statutory rape and incest are excluded. So I think like the without the consent of the victim part versus, I guess, the BJS kind of has the, you know, it needs to have some type of either force or threat of or those type of things. So, and maybe it's just the wording that's a little different, but maybe they're characterized the same when you're actually looking at the data, but I guess I was just curious.
Well, I think the force and the inability to consent, one of the big changes the FBI made in the last, I don't know if it was in 2013 or after, was to include situations where someone was incapacitated and couldn't give consent, right? And that is something that's included now in the BJS, in the NCVS definition. The way, you know, without consent is really operationalized on the NCVS is either physical force or incapacitated. That's
Okay.
sort of the way it's operationalized.
Okay.
Yeah.
And I guess, and this might be getting too into the weeds, but if, you know, we start getting this data on the NCVS and they refuse one of those conditions of like, you know, were you incapacitated in some way, if they refuse part of that, does that mean we fully miss or like potentially miss that being identified as that? And that might be too far in advance of where we are right now, but yeah, I guess I wasn't sure how refusals kind of play into that if we know there was like the penetration no matter how slight part, but if we weren't 1,000% sure on the other aspects of force or threat.
Yeah, I don't want to start getting into
Too much.
Census Bureau imputation or missing data rules, but certainly one option would be not to count it at all because you don't have enough information. I know in the survey that we did for BJS on sexual assault in juvenile institutions, it was a similar thing. There was a series of questions. If someone was missing on, say, the force question, which is what you're talking about, we wouldn't count it because we didn't have the information.
Makes sense. Thank you. Okay.
Heather, we have one from the audience online.
Let's hear it.
Thank you for hosting this valuable event, first of all. Curious what measures are in place to validate information provided by survey respondents. Once again, a thankless job. Thank you for what you do.
Jenna, do you want to take that one?
I'm not sure if they're validating, you said their responses. I'm not sure, I mean, we're essentially asking people about their victimization experiences, so we're not necessarily validating in terms of like if they reported to police, we're not checking that they actually reported to police. So we're kind of taking their answers for what they are. We, you know, have made strides to make sure that the screening questions are queued, and so we're asking people about the victimizations that they experience. I'm not sure if that's what they meant, but that's, we're not necessarily like validating it against, you know, reported crime, but we are, you know, we're measuring and thoroughly collecting the data, and the interviewers that are, doing the data collection are trained to collect these data. And then we do have, the Census Bureau, we work with them once we have the data to process it, so there's kind of an editing and coding process. So our team at the Census Bureau reviews those data, and we make sure that everything's kind of clear, similar to what Emily was saying, if data are missing, things like that, as we're coding the crime data as well. So there's a lot of verification that goes into it, kind of post-data collection.
Yeah, I would say one other thing is that at the end of the detailed incident form, people are asked to describe what happened. And the Census Bureau uses that heavily to try to go back and look at what they said on the actual closed-ended questions. And if there's a conflict, then they try to do their best to resolve the differences. So that's another way of trying to validate the actual classification.
Okay, I think we've got another question over this way.
Good afternoon. My name is Aswad Thomas. I'm the Vice President for the Alliance for Safety and Justice. We represent over 200,000 crime victims. So as you all know, gun violence continues to be a crisis in this country, especially in communities of color. Those communities that are most impacted by gun violence are often least supported by the justice system. I'm a victim of gun violence. My father was a victim. My brother was a victim. I have two cousins that's also been victims as well. We often don't talk enough or hear directly from survivors of gun violence, those survivors of non-fatal shootings, especially as it relates to Black men. So I'm curious to hear from those of you on the panel, are there any plans in the future to do more targeted research or a supplement to document the harm caused by gun violence and the policies and programs that's needed to better support Black men who are survivors of non-fatal shootings?
Okay, I think Jenna, then Janet, I think has something to say. Oh, no? Okay.
Thank you for your question. So we'll continue, since it's the National Crime Victimization Survey, we do measure, as you kind of alluded to, the non-fatal firearm violence in particular. So we will continue that in the future in terms of measuring firearm violence. It is certainly a challenge, as response rates decline, but also, let's say someone was injured in a firearm instance and they weren't in the household the next time, so we might certainly be missing some of those crimes. There aren't any necessarily plans to do targeted research. We have continued to expand, our sample to get both national estimates as well as state level estimates. So I think, as we continue to improve those data and continue to collect data, we'll have better information for, states in particular and communities. So there isn't necessarily a targeted plan for that in particular, but we will continue to measure it and continue to report out on it. We also, I think another piece of the redesign is adding kind of the community and police performance measures as well. I think that will be another kind of piece of information that will inform some of the differential community responses as well.
Thank you.
I have a couple more.
Okay, let's do this one in the room and then go to you, Rachel.
Hi, my name is Triana Cobb. I work for the Census Bureau for the NCVS, specifically editing and coding. I have a question about the concept of presence. I know that's been changed for the redesign, and I wanted to know what made you guys change how the concept of presence was, addressed in the survey.
Thanks, Triana. We know in the current instrument, one of the challenges that we have is measuring prevalence. So it's one of those areas where if it's not coded correctly, questions get skipped. So for example, if there was an attack and someone wasn't coded properly, it can get messed up. And so we wanted to take the burden off of the respondents and the field representatives to code that correctly and ask the question in particular. And so that was our goal there, was to improve that measurement, because we know it's one of the areas, and it's something that we see, and that I'm sure you will learn that you see in the editing and coding process. And so we kind of changed it. So if there was like a rape or sexual assault or an attack where it was an obvious crime where someone was present, we're just coding it as present. We're not asking. And if there wasn't, then we're specifically asking the respondent if they were present. So that was kind of the impetus for making that change, in the hopes to improve it. And we saw that with the field test that we did, that we tested all these questions before they were implemented in the field with Westat. that we didn't see improvement, and there was not as much miscoding, and that it did improve the measure. So that was where we went from there.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks.
Rachel?
Okay, so one comment on the FBI definition of rape. I believe the definition changed to include descriptors that would include the male as well. This had been missing for many years, but historical criminal acts, rape of males, compelled the need to change the definition. And then my understanding is that the NCVS collects information that complements and gains information from victims that may not be picked up by the FBI crime statistics. This is quite important. Do I have an accurate interpretation here regarding the male? Doris says yes. Erica, yes. Okay. And thank you to the audience member for the important question about gun violence. And then finally, in what languages is the survey currently conducted?
The instrument is currently conducted in both English and Spanish, and that will remain the case for the instrument redesign as well. We have updated our what we call a fact sheet or brochure that goes out to the field, as well as our advanced letter that will be available in 6 languages: English, Spanish, Arabic, Korean, Vietnamese, and I'm missing one, Chinese. Thank you. So our materials are available in multiple languages. And while the instrument is fully translated in Spanish, our interviewers can also do the instrument on the fly, and meaning if they speak the language or they have someone who can translate, we do allow for that as well. But it is only translated fully into Spanish.
Okay, let's take Jen off the hot seat for a second. Switching gears over to Janet, can you tell us a little bit about the work that you've done on the prevalence, measuring the prevalence of crime, and why this is important and different from measuring victimization rates?
Okay, so, yeah, I can't tell you that. So traditionally, the NCVS reports report out victimization rates. And what a victimization rate is the total number of victimization events that occur during a particular period divided by the number of persons in households in the U.S. or persons of particular groups when appropriate. And this overall measure of victimization, the victimization rate, allows us to compare changes over time. It lets us provide information about differences in risk across groups and to do so over time as well. Now, a prevalence rate is slightly different. It's also a measure of risk. What a prevalence rate is, what it consists of in the numerator is the total number of persons who have experienced at least one or more victimization events during a given period, divided by the total population. And what they do not count is the number of events a particular person has experienced. So it's a different measure of risk, but tells us simply whether you experienced any in this period. What's particularly useful about having both of these measures is if you use them together, you can estimate the degree of repeat victimization in the population. Repeat victimization means the number of crimes, the repeatedness or the types of persons who are likely to experience multiple events, a particularly burdensome state of victimization. And the research on repeat victimization has told us that there are certain crime types that are likely to be repeated more than others, such as intimate partner violence, school violence, some workplace violence compared to, say, stranger violence. There are types of events that are characterized more often by repeat victimization. And the measures also permit us to estimate the proportion of victimizations that occur in the United States let me rephrase. It allows us to describe what we call the concentration of victimization among victims who are experiencing these events. So, for example, in certain time periods, you might find that 10% of victims count for 40% of all incidents that occur. And why researchers and practitioners have become interested in this is because believed that if we could target these particular victims and reduce their state of victimization, we'll have a bigger kind of policy success for the effort than we would with a broad-scale program that is generally targeted at all victims. So you either go where the repeat victims are or focus on the crimes that tend to be most repeated. And that's what you can get by looking at both types of measures of risk. The other value of the prevalence measure is that if you do some reconfiguration of BJS files as a researcher, you can then do multivariate analysis, multivariate or multivariable analysis of the likelihood that you'll experience at least one or more events in a particular time period. And you can really look at, by pooling multiple years of data, intersectionalities across different subgroups that you cannot do as easily in the single-year rate-based estimation. You have more options for analysis.
Great. Got a question?
I want to say one more thing about this. I think it's useful. Different institutions have different data needs, and victimization rates, because they count the number of events, are particularly useful to the criminal justice or legal system. It's the event that triggers the institutional response if it becomes known to the institution. The police will perhaps begin to find the perpetrators, for example. But in the victim service industry, you're not interested so much in the number of events. It's not the event that triggers, it's the person. It's the individual. How many people are going to come into my agency this year? Regardless, I'm going to treat them regardless of whether they had 1 or 5 incidents. So that's the distinction is useful from an institutional perspective.
That's great. I think we've got a couple questions over on this side.
Hi, I'm Jaden Richards. I'm a doctoral student from the University of Wisconsin-Milwaukee. One of my questions was, given the lack of knowledge presently about human trafficking in the United States and even the world in general, particularly for both sex and labor trafficking, have you considered adding any questions about human trafficking to the survey?
That's a tricky one. We have not. I might kick this to Janet in terms of, or David, in terms of, from the crime panel that she was on as well, to kind of explain more. It would be a challenge to measure, so we've kind of stuck further redesign with the traditional crimes that we measure now, so violent and property crime.
Well, Janet, I think, probably knows a lot more about this than I do, but it's such a rare event that it'd be difficult for the NCVS to do much with, I think, is part of the issue. And the victims, it's sort of like homicide, right? You're not sure if you can really pick it up because the victim isn't readily there to be interviewed. But a lot of it has to do with its prevalence, or it's just so infrequent that it's, for a survey to pick up anything that could be analyzed would be very difficult.
I don't know why that's doing that, but I'd just add that it's unlikely to be successful even if it was more prevalent, simply because it's a household-based survey, and by interviewing everyone aged 12 and older in the household, you would be, first of all, missing younger victims, but also everyone else in the household knows what the questions are, and why would you would be unlikely to participate. If you're being trafficked, you're likely to be restrained from participation.
I'll add that BJS does recognize the importance of getting good data and measuring human trafficking, and is looking into other ways to capture that outside of the NCVS. So stay tuned. Subscribe to Just Stats and our social media, shameless plug, so stay tuned for that. Another question over here, and then I think we've got a couple more over there.
Hi. First of all, thank you for allowing me to be a part of this event. My question is, in regards to the NCVS, my name is Jason. I'm a grad student at Texas A&M University. when considering this NCVS on a longitudinal basis, it seems that there is a shadow figure of people who don't report crimes sort of consistent. With this new redevelopment in the NCVS survey, are there any efforts underway with criminal justice practitioners to try and bridge this gap that people who don't report, maybe at the local level or at the regional level? Is there sort of a push to try and allow people or tell people that they're allowed to report crimes to sort of bridge this gap?
It's a great question. I think, I don't think they're necessary. I think the data that we'll continue to provide and we've expanded will help kind of those policy kind of questions. In particular, in addition to the reporting to police questions, we also have expanded the satisfaction with police. So those that do report, we're now asking them about their satisfaction with their response, but also we do measure why, if they didn't report, why they didn't report. So I think that will kind of help answer that question, as well as the police performance questions that we're adding in terms of how it varies in their communities, and maybe, and kind of, I think, in terms of experiences with police, it will then impact whether or not they report. So I think the data that we're expanding can kind of help to address that question and within those communities.
All right.
Can I just say that you could do something with the current files. I mean, you just turn the normal question on its head, which is a chronic non-reporter, as opposed to a repeat victimization. A chronic non-reporter, I don't know that anybody's really studied chronic non-reporters over time and sample. So that would be pretty cool analysis. That could be done with the existing stuff, I think.
Looks like I have a new project underway. Thank you.
All right, back over to the side.
All right. I have a follow-up question for Janet. When you were talking about the cybercrime earlier, so my initial question is what really is under that umbrella of cybercrime? Does it have to be a computer, like your phone being on the internet? Is it anything that's nonverbal or face-to-face? Sorry.
So the report, the third-party report that just came out from BJS last month, it's extensive and very thorough and good. The answer is no. It could be phone, it could be all sorts of communication, the tools, internet tools, whether it doesn't have to be restricted to the computer. But I'm sorry, I can't remember the details of their recommendation. I only knew I should at least look at it
I'll read
quickly before I came here.
Nope. Yeah, no, I think, Emily, as usual, you are zeroing in on the heart of the issue, which is that measuring and defining what is cybercrime is really a very complex and difficult thing to do. There's a GAO report that also just came out that looked across the federal government and examined the varying definitions currently in use. And one of the recommendations to very kind of high-level summarize was that we do need common definitions and measures across the federal government to be able to really put our arms around what is cybercrime.
Okay, so is there a survey right now that exists based on threats in terms of if it was over the phone, if it was a text? Does anything actually capture those types of threats right now?
All right, so in the NCVS stocking supplement, you want to talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, I mean, we do that in the stocking supplement. I mean, some of the like cyber-related crimes we are collecting. So stocking supplement is a good example of that because there's cyber stalking in there. Same with even bullying with the school crime supplement. So that there's that cyber-related is maybe the better term. And even the fraud supplement. But in terms, I mean, you're right. So right now in the NCVS, we do collect threats, but if they're not face-to-face, then we don't count them as NCVS crimes, and that will remain the case. So that is one of the things and challenges in terms of measuring kind of quote-unquote cybercrime, as well as defining what all it includes.
Okay. Yeah, I was curious, like, if someone were to just, on a phone call, it's their voice, they're just not in front of you and they're threatening, if anywhere captures that besides, I guess, police reports, like UCR, like maybe that's where people capture that?
Right. Well, I think that's where the legal landscape is also rapidly changing, and what rises to the level of a crime can vary from state to state, at the federal level, between states, and so there's a lot of work to keep us all busy on this topic in the near future and in the long-term future.
Thank you. I'll give you guys a breakdown.
Yeah. Oh, hi, Rich Levy, Census Bureau. The question about rape and changing the definition of rape made me wonder, are there going to be any changes to gender identity definitions in the upcoming redesign?
We added both sexual orientation and gender identity to the NCVS in 2016.
Okay.
So those questions will remain on the instrument during the redesign. The field continues to evolve, but as of right now, the questions will remain as they are on the current instrument that we had tested. So they'll be the same in the instrument redesign as well.
Okay, thank you. Oh.
Related to that, I saw in the decennial census, I saw on the 2030 decennial they're going to have Middle Eastern and Arabic ethnicity. Is there any additions to that ethnicity or racial demographics to the?
That's a great question, and for just in case others can't hear on virtual, the question was about any changes to the race and ethnicity measures. As of right now, no official changes. There is a lot of work going on at the Census Bureau as well as OMB in terms of kind of making recommendations for how those measures should be collected. And so when those decisions are eventually made, then that would apply for all, I think, the entire federal statistical system, which would also include the NCVS. So we're not going to make that change on our own. We'll make that as kind of a larger statistical system and decision. So as of right now, they'll remain the same.
Okay, last question. We'll give it over here.
I don't know if it's a good one, but I just wanted to know, I wanted clarification on, Jennifer, I think you had said that the field representatives, if they can speak the language, they can translate the survey kind of on the fly. So in my world, where we work with translation, we've seen like they can be translated in different ways. So with something so nuanced as the survey, how do you ensure that they are translating it, I guess, appropriately or correctly, or it's capturing what the survey is trying to capture?
Yeah, that's a good question, and definitely, I think, a challenge. I think that our kind of goal is to try to get that interview completed, and so if someone else in the household can translate, while not ideal, because we want the interview to be private, there is that goal there. So I think we do the best that we can, and hope that the translation kind of works. I know that like we said, the instrument is fully translated in Spanish, but other languages it's not. So we try to do our best there, but do recognize that it may not be perfect.
Do you know how often it happens? Do you have any data on that?
It's very rare.
Okay.
So I think it's around like maybe 4% of interviews. It might not even be that high. So it's a very, very small number of interviews. And that, I think, when I say that, also includes Spanish interviews. So it's a small number of interviews that are not conducted in English right now.
Awesome. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay. Jim, I'll give you the last word. Keep you on your toes. So looking forward to this current redesign. Tell us one thing that you're looking forward to seeing as this comes online.
Well, I think that some of the most exciting things, I'm sorry, are microphones. They're really new. But some of the more exciting things I think that people have said noted throughout the day is the additional information on police and community administered not just to victims, but also to the whole sample. Mm-hmm. That's one of the two of the most exciting things that we can, and couple that with the subnational estimation, which is enabled by that sample boost. That's going to be really, really, I look forward to that a lot, because that can tell us a lot of things we couldn't tell before,
Great. All right, as we're wrapping up here, we're going to break for the next 30 minutes to enjoy this incredible cake in the back that was baked by our dear colleague, Catherine Dark-Schmidt. Can we get a round of applause for KDS? All right. And while you're enjoying your cake, the student spotlight presentations are stationed around the room, and our 4 students who are here today will be by those presentations. While you're enjoying that cake, I really encourage you to walk around and listen to them, give their presentations. This is the part of today that I am most excited about because these guys work so hard to get here. Over the summer, we put out a call to students to come up with research ideas for working with the NCVS data. We got tons of submissions in, and our team went through all of those. They selected the top 5 students. 4 are here today. The 5th one, Isabella, we hope you're online. She had a last-minute travel issue and is not able to join us in person, but we hope you're there virtually. Her presentation is also on view if you're interested in seeing it. And so we are just so excited that they're here with us today. And then after the break, the future is female. The second session brings us an all-women panel that will be looking at what we've learned from the NCVS. It promises to be a very interesting discussion. And so recognizing now that I am the one thing standing between you and cake, let's give this panelist for the NCVS Innovation Panel a round of applause. And we'll see you after the break.
Based on crime and victimization, as well as the intersection of the NCVS with the FBI's NIBRS, or National Incident-Based Reporting System. I am excited to moderate this panel today with my 4 esteemed colleagues. First, Erica Smith is the Unit Chief of the Law Enforcement Incident-Based Statistics Unit at BJS. I was planning to read all of this, but since it is in your program, I'm going to save time so we have time for questions. And then next, we have Emily Berg, who is an Associate Professor in the Department of Statistics at Iowa State University. She is also currently serving in a 2-year collaboration with BJS through an Intergovernmental Personnel Act, or IPA, agreement. Third, we have Erica Harrell, who is one of my colleagues in the victimization unit and has worked at BJS, I believe, 17 years, 18, a long time. She is our OG in the unit right now. And then finally, Min Shea, who is a professor in criminology and criminal justice at the University of Maryland at College Park. So we are going to start with 1 question for each of the panelists, and then we are going to go to audience questions, and Heather is going to moderate for me on the virtual. So please send in your questions if you're online. All right, first, Erica Harrell. Looking back, there have been several significant changes to socio-demographic questions in the NCVS. Can you please describe these?
Yes, back in the 90s, questions on public housing, college and university housing, college and university employment, and identifying housing units on Indian reservations and Indian lands were added to the NCVS. In the 2000s, we started asking about disability in response to a congressional mandate. The employment questions were revised on the crime incident form. The race of respondent question was changed so that respondents could select more than one race, and and created an other specify option on the question. And also the education question was combined. There were 2 questions, educational attainment and education completed. Those were combined into a single question. In the 2010s, back in 2012, we changed the race and ethnicity of offender questions to be more in compliance with the OMB standards. In 2015, we added more ranges to the income question so that the ranges on the upper end go higher than $75,000. In 2016, we added several questions to the survey. I think Jenna mentioned sexual orientation and gender identity. We also added veteran status, and citizenship to the screener. And we also moved the disability questions. They were originally on the crime incident form, and they were moved to the screener in 2016. So we've had a lot of change.
Sure have. All right, thank you. And Erica Smith. BJS has looked at victimization of older adults in both NIBRS and the NCVS. What are some key takeaways looking at these two data sources?
Thank you, Rachel. I'm going to stay away from using any actual numbers just in case. But,
fine with me.
But what I do want to talk about when it comes to measuring victimization of older adults is that I think the NCVS and the FBI's NIBRS data show really similar patterns of victimization. One of the difficulties with trying to study elder abuse using criminal victimization data from either of these sources is that the rates tend to look low, right, compared to other age groups. But what you see when you really start to disaggregate the information is that there are pretty unique aspects to these crimes, especially on the violent victimization side, which we've got pretty solid data about from both data sources for long periods of time. What we see in both sources of data, this is a really hidden offense that's perpetrated behind closed doors by people that are known to the victim, which makes it likely that we're seeing a lot that's not reported to the police, which we can uncover in the NCVS to some degree. And then we're also finding that in the police data, it has often amounted to these cases being cleared at a much lower rate. So we're seeing things like, even if you're just trying to understand who perpetrated the incident against older adults using the police data, I'm going to use a term I hate, but I don't know how else to describe it. When you're looking at victims 65 and older and you sort of aggregate those into categories, the oldest of the old victims, you rarely know anything about who the supposed offender is. And that's consistent by state, it's consistent over time. And I think it would be a really great marriage of the data sources if we could try to ferret out some of these patterns using both the NCVS data and the police data, something that I hope that we can undertake over time now that NIBRS is up to 75% coverage of the country. So I'm hopeful that that's something that we can tackle. I also think that in another way that can be very complementary is that we now have national estimates for 2022 when they're released in a couple of weeks. We've got estimates of fraud of the elderly, which we did not have last year in the 2021 NIBRS estimates. So there's a lot that we're going to be able to draw together, I think, on both sides of this question and try to understand elder abuse a little bit more differently than we have in the past.
Perfect, thank you. Emily Berg. A common theme we hear is around the idea that crime is a local problem. The NCVS, however, was designed to produce national estimates. Please tell us about some of the research you're doing to estimate crime at subnational levels.
I've been trying to use statistical models to obtain state-level estimates of crime rates. For violent crime, I model overall violent crime and simple assault and then deduce the remaining category. For property crime, I model for burglary and theft, as well as all remaining theft, and then deduce overall property crime. I've been using data for 2 3-year intervals, 2017 through 2019 and 2020 through 2022. I use what's called a multivariate log normal model, meaning the model has multiple response variables and is fit in the log scale.
Perfect, thank you. Min, we hear a lot about the distinction between crimes reported to police and those not reported to police. In addition to everything everyone has said today, why is this important and are there differences?
Thank you for giving me the easiest question today. I think instead of trying to repeat what that has been said today, and I'm a professor, so I can talk in theories, in abstract the whole day, but instead of doing that, the easiest way, I think, to understanding the importance of a crime reporting is through a story that I heard from a police officer working in Arlington, Texas. So the officer is Dr. Tarek McGuire. And if I didn't remember the detail of the story correctly, that's my mistake, but the credit of the story goes to him. Basically, Arlington, Texas has a large size Latino population. And they also have a big church that serves the Latino population in the area. And so the police officers wanted to build a strong public community police relationship through like teaching, like offer English classes to local residents. And through the church, they got a lot of people to sign up for their class. And then that evening, police officers drove to church and got excited about they're going to offer this English class. Not many people showed up. So they were puzzled because there is a long list of people who were planned to attend the church class. And so they were like, what's going on? And then they went out, they realized because they parked their patrol cars, right, at the entrance of the church. And people were wearing full uniforms. And now they realize their mistake because they see people driving by and then leave. And so what happened, then they asked officers to remove their vehicles to a different parking lot, and they asked police officers changed out of their uniforms for the class. And then, of course, then after that, they started to see people come into church, and they were able to offer this English class. And what's interesting is then weeks later, they began to have a good relationship now with local community. Suddenly, their crime rate went up because now people began to call the police to tell them they have been robbed, they have had problems. So I think this is a very good story illustrating the importance of police victims' decisions to call the police, because when victims not calling the police, they won't be able to get services, and offenders will go unpunished, and we won't have good data to support research and policy development. And from the story, you can also see that even though often we know crime severity is very important for reporting, so crimes that involving injuries and weapons have a higher reporting rate. That's true, but severity of the crime is only just part of the story. There are important factors influencing reporting, including victims' social characteristics like race, ethnicity, age, social income, so on. And so policy and the community characteristics, such as police-community relationships, really important for the reporting of the crime. And NCVS data does provide information about crimes reported, not reported, and the reasons behind these decisions. So it's an incredibly valuable data source for the study of crime reporting.
Thank you, Min. Any questions from the audience? Do you have any brave souls who want to come up to the mic? Heather? Juan, anything over there?
Okay, we've got, you want me to take that one first?
You can go first.
No?
No, I was saying you can go if you.
All right, Heather first.
All right, so we've just got one question coming in about subnational and wondering whether we have coverage in large and medium-sized cities and the suburban areas around those cities. So maybe somebody could describe a little bit about what subnational data we have available.
Emily, do you want to do that?
I haven't really considered data as local as cities or suburbs. That's a terrific question. I have primarily considered state-level estimation, which I realize is a bit more broad than what the question was referring to.
So we definitely have state-level information. We also have some MSA information. Earlier this year, we published a public use file at ICPSR that had MSA data from 2000 to 2015, so that's definitely an option. And then if you want to go through the process of getting census-restricted data, which is a long road, you could get other levels of geography as well. So, thank you.
Okay. Hello, my name is Triana, and I work for the NCVS at Census. My question isn't to one specific panelist anyone can answer. Given the research you all have done with NCVS data, what do you think can be done to fill in the gaps that the NCVS data doesn't capture?
Does anyone want to start? Min, do you want to start? Gaps in NCVS?
Sure. just for my own research, the immediate answer I can think of would be those hard to access populations. So there are populations that if they don't live in a household, and they will not be in the survey. But even for people who are captured by the survey, then there are different types of crime that may not be currently in the NCVS. And also, there is also this consideration of survey non-participation or their unwillingness to interact with survey interviews, or so there are definitely still systematic patterns in the underreporting in the NCVS, even for the types of crime that's captured in the NCVS, and I think that's one of the major research area for survey researchers trying to figure out how best to interact with participants to get the most accurate information. Thank you.
Erica Smith, did you want to add? You kind of looked at me earlier, so maybe.
Sure. Yeah, I think we might speak about this a little bit later, just talking about the complements between the data collected by the FBI's UCR program and the NCVS, but certainly I think they can inform each other, but there are some advantages on the police administrative data side, or not even, I don't even want to call it necessarily administrative data. There's a whole lot of data sources that can inform our understanding of the space between what we learn from a victimization survey and what we get from crime incident data, right? There's a lot about property crime and like commercial robberies. We don't get really anywhere else. So that's one of the bonuses, one of the benefits, I would say, of the NIBRS data collection. Also, one thing that BJS is working on right now is trying to understand, what do people actually call the police for? What is it that they're requesting of their local law enforcement agencies or emergency responders? We don't really have a broad sense of that right now. So we kicked off a project last year, I guess maybe last December, to do some R&D work to get calls for service data from some large agencies to see how we could process that and what was publicly available. Because I think, anecdotally, we've got the number that's lived out there, 10 to 20% of all the calls for service. That's all that's small percentage, what we're trying to say, is related to an actual crime. Everything else is some other type of service. We need to validate that empirically and then understand if that's actually accurate. What's that other 80%, and how do we support law enforcement, but then how do we also help people in the community with what they're actually requesting of local officials?
All right, thank you.
Thanks. Go.
There we go. My name's Sean Gann. I'm a research associate at we're no longer JRC. We are now the Justice Information Research JR. One of those two. So it was touched on a little bit earlier today about the conversion or the rollout of NIBRS and the redesign of the NCVS. If NIBRS ever hits, a decent threshold, are there any questions? So using both of those data sets in conjunction, are there any types of research that we might be able to do now that we weren't before? Are there any specific research questions that might be answerable now using those two data sets in conjunction that we weren't able to before?
NIBRS queen.
I was going to say, I'm not shy, so yes, I think so. So especially for 2022, we have 75% agency coverage, 78% population coverage for the 2022 data year. So greatly improved from the year before, enormously improved from when we started, right, in 2016. So what that has amounted to for the 2022 set of estimates is that we are able to produce unsuppressed state-level estimates, and that's important because we have a statistical threshold for publication that is quite rigorous, and we had a lot of data suppressed last year for what actually went out to the public. So this year we have a lot more, quite a few more estimates that we can actually provide out. But in addition, we have a lot more state-level estimates that we can make available. We've also expanded. Last year, we had regional estimates. We have stronger regional estimates now, so the precision of the estimates, those confidence intervals have shrunk. And we've generated MSA-level estimates, and we're working right now on judicial districts and FBI field offices so that we have a clear understanding of all of the different, constituencies that we respond to sort of with crime data in an ongoing sort of way. I think there's a lot of opportunity to use those sub-national estimates from the FBI's data to inform the NCVS sample, to understand some differences in the victimization patterns we see from police data. Things like some of the differences between even just something as simple as urban, suburban, and rural places, right? Or by city size, things of that nature can inform how we might reallocate sample in the future so that we have a way to kind of marry victimization estimates with what we see from the reported data. So I think there's a lot of opportunity coming up, and we're really just sort of we're almost to the top of that hill, you know? We're so close. Yeah.
Thank you.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yep.
I'm Crown Princess Mayala Mukudim Bent Abdullah Bent Abdulaziz Al Saud, and I'm from the Royal Kingdom or the government of Saudi Arabia. We work with your DOJ and all of your legal departments. We have established a court here, that's Middle Eastern Armed Forces and Court. And the question is that we have from a lot of our Middle Eastern constituents is that there has been a rise of hate crimes in different countries, France and so forth, because of changes of municipal laws that have been changed against towards the hijab and different clothes of Muslim females. Okay, so we wanted to know in that apparatus, how is your data being correlated towards what's happening overseas, how it's filtering over here, and how the data mechanism is being orchestrated as to how much percentage of that is affecting Americans?
So you're asking about hate crimes in the United States compared to hate crimes abroad?
I'm asking that we know that it's filtering over here because social media, you know, a lot of people see something happening overseas, although it's not being implemented here, it's being acted out. So do you guys have a data apparatus towards hate crimes as per Middle Easterners or people of that ethnicity?
Okay, okay. Erica, do you have anything related to hate crime in your notes? No?
Really? We do collect hate crimes nationally, and we do report out, but in terms of just specifically hate crimes specifically against Middle Eastern people, don't think that we report.
Foreigners in general. It doesn't have to be scripted to Middle Eastern, but foreigners in general, because you do have a large influx of migrants and other people of foreign entities that are coming into the United States in very large numbers. This can be a hate crime more so also in the cyber apparatus because a lot of it is being filtered to social media as well.
So I would say, so the NCVS, first of all, is a household survey in the United States. So people have to be living in households.
Yes.
Yeah, but we do ask about citizenship and clearly have hate crime questions. I would imagine the sample sizes for non-citizens are going to be pretty low, so we'd have to aggregate a lot of data together. But I do think that is an interesting research question and something, to some extent, that could be looked at with the NCVS data.
Because I understand also people that are like quote unquote would be new citizens in like 5 years, between 5 and 10 years, they're still considered kind of new, but they're still getting that same backlash as people that have just arrived and not obtained citizenship as yet. So they're kind of like in the same thing. So if you guys would consider doing a survey on this, can you see where the difference is and where it is aligning together? That's my question. It's not my question.
I know, I appreciate the comment.
Thank you.
Thank you. Emily?
Hello. So I have a roster question, Erica, probably. So when we collect the NCVS roster data, we're asking, you know, a majority of the questions about their sex relationship, their birth, you know, information, like the birth month and year, and then, you know, military status, education, Hispanic origin, and race. We're asking that of the household respondent. And then on the back end, we have our socio-demographic questions, which are asked individually of people, so our, you know, disability, citizenship, SOGI, so the sexual orientation and gender identity, and then veteran status, and then employment things. Was there ever a conversation of having something like race self-reported? Because I think the question is something like, what race does John Doe, like, I don't know, describe themselves as? Shouldn't that be more of a self-reported question? And I guess just wondering if there were tests done about, like, self-reporting of that kind of question versus having the household respondent, especially for like a roommate situation where they might not know all the background about that person.
I mean, we count on census to do all these big tests, don't we? My history at BJS, I do not know why it was done that way. If anyone else wants to, nope, Jenna does not want to jump in. I mean, yeah, it could. Back on you. Census Bureau decision.
Hey, we're not allowed to do anything without BJS approval. Just, yes, I think I've
It is
seen
an interesting
questions of that
question.
before.
Yes, yeah. And why some demographic characteristics are asked of the household respondent and some are asked of the person. I mean, It's fair, totally fair.
Okay.
We'll talk about it.
I definitely understand having some at the beginning, so we're getting, like, are they NCVS eligible based on age? But I guess just thinking of, like, the second half of our demo detailed of, you know, the military, education attained, Hispanic origin, and, or also, are you attending school, and then our race.
Yep.
It's almost like those questions maybe ask them of the person and move them back, but just curious, just a thought.
Okay.
Sure, maybe. Thanks.
We'll talk about it. Thank you. Ready to go?
Hey, yeah, my name's Michael McNulty. I'm also with the Census Bureau field representative. So, getting the data
Thank you
for
for your work.
Yeah, of course, welcome. Well, that's what I'm here for. So, I'm just curious. This is my second survey. My primary one's National Health Interview Survey. We work with NCHS, but I've only had this survey for about a month or two. Just curious on what statistics maybe you guys would like to see over at BGS a little bit more of, like, so when I'm out in the field, maybe I can have something I can have my head to wrap around to sort of look for when I'm collecting data.
So, like, what we are publishing and, like, the key indicators that folks are answering from the survey?
Yeah, if there's any, like, statistics that you're looking for to sort of fill gaps, like there's underreported, I guess, households, so to speak. Do you guys have any? I know it's sort of a field question, but
I know this is me, and at the moment I don't.
Thank you.
Thank you. Now, I can't think of anything in particular right now. I mean, we appreciate every completed interview you guys get, and I think the key for us is to have the lowest amount of missing data as possible. So trying to get answers to these tough questions is a challenge in and of itself. So we appreciate you doing that. Thank you.
Okay, so we have another question.
Okay. Can you speak a little bit more into the microphone? Thank you.
So we have another question. It's on human trafficking.
Okay.
And basically, we know that the indigenous population here in the United States, in different states, have a large problem with this. Also, a lot of new immigrants that have come into the country made the problem to expand more. So the question is the influx in the past couple of months being recorded in your data as to, is it ongoing, like ongoing monitoring, or if it's like monthly, timely, and how is it monitored in order for you to be able to, I'm trying to translate, in order for you to be able to have accurate data as to the differences between indigenous persons, immigrants that are coming in, and regular Americans as per this crime.
Okay. Erica, you turned your microphone on. I mean, I'm happy to start, but feel free.
I don't think, we do not capture human trafficking in the NCVS. That's something that is very difficult to capture, but I think at BJS, we do have other ways of capturing human trafficking, but it's not within the NCVS. And in terms of the number of the influx of immigrants, the NCVS is an ongoing survey. It's happening all the time, and we report out annually. So if there was like an increase in non-citizens for a particular year, you may be able to report that with our citizenship question. But for a particular month, I'm not sure if we'd be able to capture that.
So why are you not being able to allocate this into your data?
So I think what Erica is saying is that it's difficult to measure in the type of survey that the NCVS is, household-based, where it's structured around a certain set of types of crime right now, and it's because of the rarity of human trafficking and certain subpopulations potentially being more at risk that might not be included in the sample. The FBI has been required to measure human trafficking since 2013, and so they've had a data collection for about a decade now. The detailed incident data that comes into the FBI now includes human trafficking, the two major forms of human trafficking, commercial sex acts, and then labor trafficking. The one thing that we've been investigating when we've been evaluating the data for quality and sort of different patterns of reporting is that we just see larger numbers of human trafficking cases coalescing around the southern border. So we're just not really sure if it's, so we know anecdotally that the Texas, I'm blanking on what they're called, but the Texas Rangers, the Texas State Troopers, they have a pretty robust training program around human trafficking, how to identify it, how to recognize signs during traffic stops and things like that of people who may be trafficked being in the vehicle. That's pretty unique to that state. And so we don't know if the larger numbers are because they're able to identify it or if it's actually just more prevalent. So that's one of the real struggles of the administrative data, in addition to the fact that you're not going to get a lot of the nuance that I think is critical to your organization and the people that you serve, because it's observational representation by a law enforcement officer of the person in front of them. So they might not know a lot of the status information. And that's definitely not going to bubble up to the federal level, unfortunately. But there are lots of ways to have those conversations with people who represent that decision process within the FBI. So if you're interested in learning more about that and just understanding it more even, to know if it's a step you want to take, I'm happy to talk with you about it. Thank you. Yes.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Lana Harrison, Professor Emerita from the University of Delaware, but, and also I love your data. Congratulations on 50 years. I've worked on other national surveys as well that are long and ongoing. One of the big problems, of course, is change. Of course, we have to stay current, but at the same time, when we change things, we change our sample, we change who we are interviewing, we change our methodology, we may be changing our results and skewing our results. So I'm wondering if you've got a methodological series, or does the Bureau of Justice, does somebody else do that for you, the Census Department, or how do you make sure? I heard somebody earlier say something about until we have the split sample, we won't be able to integrate this data. How is it you go about making sure your trend lines are, trending as they should and are correct with all the changes that you're making in the survey?
Erica, do you want to talk about, the process and our relationship with Census to process data and make decisions?
Okay, all right. In terms of, to answer your question, Lana, that we document our methodological work, we have several ways of doing that. Yes, we do go to the Census Bureau and we do ask that they do research for us and they give them our results. We also have other organizations that have done research for us, and we do what are called third-party reports that we don't write at BJS, but they do, and those are mainly on methodological things that have occurred. If we were making a change to a supplement, and we allow an agency to, do the research for it, sometimes we may allow them to write a report that describes all of that research. So does that kind of get at what you were asking?
It sort of does. It sort of does, yeah. Okay. I think it's, one of the agencies I work for actually went back in time and changed earlier estimates because they had a new sample, they had new weighting criteria. So you may have had one of the, hard copies from 1980, but when you look at it in 2012 and you look at that 1980 data, it's not what you saw in 1980. And I'm assuming you've never done that. You've never changed data. If you had a point estimate for 1982, it's still the same point estimate today. Is that correct?
I do not know that, I don't think we're changing official estimates unless we find out they are wrong and that there was an error in code or something like that. Methodologically, in 2016, when we went through sample redesign with Census, we ended up, we had a lot of new cases coming in, and we realized that the sample, that year of data were not comparable to previous years and would not be comparable to future years. So we manipulated the file so that it was, and we kept very good notes and worked with Census to develop that file and figure out how to compare, because that is a key part of the NCVS, is being able to compare over time. So.
And you published those methodological reports?
You bet we did.
Okay, good.
My name is on it, so. All right. There's nothing online. I'll get back to what I had, okay?
Can I ask a question, Rachel?
Sure, Jim.
This is for Erica. I think that, did you go through the entire time series with your elderly analysis? And if not, where did you stop? It's a benign question. It's just information.
No. I've looked at it several different times. There's only one actual publication, unfortunately. But yeah, I had initially discovered some of those disparities back when I looked at 5 years of data, I think. I don't remember. I have the publication from 2012, so a very long time ago. But I've evaluated it again, periodically over time as more states have come on board as full reporters to NIBRS, and then also for various working groups and things like that in DOJ, and it's pretty consistent. And I know I've spoken with folks at OVC about, the training work that they do with prosecutors to conduct forensic interviews with older adults. It is challenging because there's an underlying assumption that they cannot respond adequately, that they don't remember things. And I'll also say too, so it was about 10 years ago, I'm going to plug this later if we get to the what do we want from the NCVS portion. But about 10 years ago, I was working on a project to try to expand victimization surveys into nursing homes. And it was devastating to like try to talk to nursing home administrators. They thought so little of the people living in those facilities. They lie, they think that, you know, they think so-and-so stole their stuff when they just misplaced it because they never remember anything. I mean, it was terrible. I mean, I should get some of the Westat folks that I worked with. I mean, we were just, it was devastating. So I think there's a lot of that sort of, it's ageism, right, that's brought to the table, and the data bear it out. I mean, it'd be one thing if you didn't see it in the data, but you do. And it theoretically should be agnostic to any of that. So, yeah.
All right, we are going to turn to a question for Emily Berg. So there are a few different ways to produce subnational estimates using NCVS data. And what can we learn from model-based estimates using NCVS data that we cannot observe from direct estimates?
That's a really good question and really difficult.
Can you put our microphone on, please? Yep, thank you.
I think that one can do many of the same things with model-based estimates that one can do with direct estimates, but with improved efficiency, smaller standard errors, for example. In some cases, one can use models to obtain estimates for domains where the sample size is 0. In my experience, that's often very difficult to do.
Thank you. Min, you've done some research using the restricted NCVS data files, lucky you, and looked at lower levels of geography than the United States. Can you tell us a little bit about this research and why it was important to use these rough files compared to the PUF or the public use files?
Well, thank you for the question. As many of you know, NCVS data in the restricted version would have geographic identifiers such as states, metropolitan areas, counties, cities, and census tracts that are not available in the public use file. For that reason, you can use the data to really understand the importance of social context and crime. But it's also difficult in the sense of in order to access the data requires a lot of commitment. You have to work with the Census Bureau, the Research Data Center, and to access the data, which means usually, for example, from the time you submit your application to the time you actually are able to step into the Data Research Center may take you more than a year or so, if you're lucky. And so for that reason, you really have to think through in terms of the types of questions you would like to address, and just to make it justifiable for the amount of time it's going to take for you to do the research. And to give you one example, in a collaboration with BJS statisticians, we use the data to try to understand young Latino adults. And, you know, police data would not be sufficient because these types of information are hard to get about the characteristics of the victims, but you can use NCVS data to study these subgroups. And we looked at young Latino adults and to see how their victimization risk changed depending on where they live. And what we found was that those living in the newer establishment areas for Latinos tend to have higher violent victimization risks. In contrast, those living in the traditional Latino areas have lower risk, and we studied the data and realized it's largely due to the facts such as co-ethnic support they have in traditional areas is really important protective factors for young Latino adults. And also another way to justify the use of restricted data is for policy evaluations. And, you know, NCVS is used for the national estimates. So when you have these geographic identifiers, now you can link your data to a local area and compare to see how specific policies might be useful to predict victimization or encourage reporting. So for example, we used it recently in a recent paper to show how some of the immigration enforcement policies are directly correlated with the different levels of victimization, shows that some of the policies may actually have unintended consequences of increasing crime. So for that reason, having these data really allow us to have the better ability to understand crime and social space. So make it worth it. And I would really encourage people who want to use the data to get in touch with BJS because they're super helpful in helping collecting people with Census Bureau.
I joke about it because it is quite a process to get it, and I am involved in a technical working group on having a standard way to apply for these data, but it is clearly very worth it. And we have to protect the people that we are interviewing, and there's a reason they're restricted. So I encourage all researchers, if they are interested, to go that route, but it will be a long road. It's not quick, like downloading files at NACJD. So, Heather, Ann. Yes, please.
Hi, Ann Carson, BJS. So I'm going to take your question a little bit further and say that under the Evidence Act, we are being encouraged to bash data sets together and you know, share more. And all of the linkage examples that you have brought up have been sort of area-based, geography-based. Mm-hmm. And I'm wondering what you think would need to happen to actually do it at an individual level. So that would involve changing your consent process mm-hmm. to ask for the ability to link mm-hmm. the individual's data to other data from the future, such as if they move, mm-hmm. or if they die, or if they apply for Medicare or Medicaid, mm-hmm. What their income is 20 years down the road, so that you could look at people by their victimization at some point, and then in the future, see how they're doing theoretically. Mm-hmm. And I'm wondering, how would you think about testing the consent process for that, and what you think that might do to your response rates? I know this is all
I have no idea.
Just saying.
Yeah, which question do you want us to answer?
Just you know, has that been considered? Do you think it's just completely impossible, and you don't even want to broach it?
Nothing's completely impossible. Okay, let's say that, right?
Can I throw something out?
Yes,
there,
please.
So this isn't BJS work at all, but I'm involved in a working group that is specifically designing a person-centric data model that would bring those types of pieces of information together. We haven't quite gotten to the point of talking about the time bounding aspect and how we ensure that we're following the right person over multiple years across states, right? So baby steps. But we've developed this model because the idea was, you know, that we've got this comprehensive problem in criminal justice that we don't know anything about the public health, victimization, et cetera, background of people that come into contact with the justice system. And we know there's you know, broadly that the victim-offender overlap is a real thing and that they contribute to one another, and, you know, previous adverse conditions and childhood impact things. So we really wanted to find a way to bring this together. And one of the real, I would say, catalysts for it was trying to understand the background for people who perpetuate human trafficking, because there's so much interaction with drug offenses, both trafficking in drugs and using them, right? Abuse, and then childhood victimizations, involvement with the justice system previously, et cetera. So I mean, if you want to be involved, please join us. Like, it's an ongoing development, much easier to implement at the state than the federal level, but I mean, hopefully over time it bubbles up.
I mean, and I would say, I don't know what the consent process would look like, but I'm thinking of the demographic framework that's going on at the Census Bureau and some other work, and I'm not an expert in that, but that they are trying to figure out how to build a frame with demographic information, so maybe we don't have to ask people all these questions every single time, and we can link across different kinds of data collections and such, which is some very interesting work. Anything online? I know we're winding down. Anybody else before I go to my final question? All right. Looking ahead, what is one thing you would like to learn from the NCVS? One new thing? You.
I want to know who the non-respondents are.
Ooh.
So I have two.
That's fine.
Well, my first one is, who are the non-respondents? Jenna and I, can you believe it, did work together a long time ago, looking specifically at household prevalence rates, and one of the key, is it on the screener? Something that anyway, it's like background admin information on the survey is, what type of non-response was it? I want to know who they are, and if you see them, if you see non-response, kind of coalesce around different demographic types.
It's very interesting.
I would love to see that. And then I will give a plug to expanding to assisted living facilities, especially where people live mostly self-sufficiently and on their own. I know that the Census Bureau has a map of assisted living facilities, but I don't think they're we don't know if they're part of the frame.
The group quarters.
I would love to see that as well. Nursing homes were a pain in the backside, but I think assisted living facilities could work.
Those are great questions. TBD.
Yeah.
Emily?
So far in the subnational estimation work, we've looked a lot at area level models, which are models that are fit at the level of the domain. And this might be kind of getting ahead of myself, but I think that using some of these other sorts of administrative data sources and linkages could perhaps allow fitting models at the unit level. That could be something very interesting to explore.
Definitely. Erica?
I would like to figure out more about local area estimates of identity theft. Full disclosure, I work on the identity theft supplement and I write the reports. But every time I publish a report, I always end up getting a question. Do you have identity theft for whatever state or even a specific city? So I just would like to, once we get more research done on local area estimates of the core, I would like for us to turn to the supplements and see what we can do there.
That's great. Min?
Well, I was hoping that I were able to sneak into like two options, but if I have to choose one, I really would like to see the new data that is based on the new instrument, particularly because it's going to have the two modules, the police performance module and the community safety module. And currently, it's really hard to try to link the main NCVS questionnaires with the supplement about the police public contact. But now with the new instrument, we should be able to get a bigger or deeper understanding about how people's perception of the police, their contact with the police, and their perceptions of communities directly linked to their victimization, also longitudinally and across space. So that's something I'm really quite excited about, the new data.
Your wish will be granted. The others, I don't know.
It doesn't happen often.
All right. Thank you all today for staying after the cake. Thank you to the panelists. And yeah, that's it.
Second, I think that one of the themes of both the morning session and the afternoon session is the kind of, we talk about the role that the NCVS has played both in BJS and kind of the broader criminal justice community. But one of the nice things about today in particular, both in person and online, is a recognition of those people whose careers have in some fundamental way revolved around the NCVS. And I think one of the really nice things about the event today, both this morning and this afternoon, is that there are a lot of people here. There are the current people at BJS who work on the NCVS, and there are a lot of people here today, and some were here this morning and took off for whatever reason. I'm sure they went home to watch online. But I wanted to briefly just, we did a lot of kind of standing and acknowledging, but we didn't pay particular attention to the people who either currently at BJS or were at BJS who have worked on the NCVS. And so I thought if the people who are in the room, people online, they can wave or cheer. I think they can cheer now because we're in WebEx or whatever. But the people who are in the room who are current victimization statistics or people who are former VSU folks, if you want to just take a quick stand and the rest of us can acknowledge your contribution. Nice try, Heather. Yeah, great. Somebody got Grace up, so yeah. And of those, I think Michael Planty and Lynn Langton were here this morning. They were former VSU chiefs. Michael Rand is a former VSU chief, and Heather Rassos, who fortunately we still have at BJS, is a former VSU chief. And I guess stay tuned on the next person to join that group. Thank you for your time. This was great. This is how a day should be spent, is listening to people talk about data, but also kind of keeping in mind what that data means for real lives and for the impact on both policy and how people experience and the criminal justice system. And the NCVS captures that nicely. It doesn't capture everything, and we will continue to work on it to improve it. That's, I think, something that we're committed to, and that's something that I think if there's anything you can say about the last 50 years is that there's been kind of ongoing work to continue to make the NCVS relevant. Thanks to a lot of the people in this room, both who have worked on the NCVS directly or who have advocated for the NCVS in their different roles kind of in the policy community. And I want to thank all of you. And then I was thinking about this as I was sitting there. When something goes well, you don't appreciate how much work went into it to make it happen. Those things only show up, like you begin to wonder who's doing the work behind the scenes when something goes awry. Nothing, to my knowledge anyhow, which may be the key indicator here, to my knowledge has gone awry today. And so I thank some specific people this morning, and we did this morning, but in particular the BJS staff who have kind of filled in every possible role today, getting people in and around the buildings, getting food in the right place, all of those things, getting people to the right place, getting clothes to the right place. All of that has been done quietly with I think, good humor, and I want to thank the people I work with at BJS and some of the contract staff who we've had kind of help us along on those efforts and have made today. This is great. Let's do this again. Doris said no. So I want to thank all of them. I want to thank all of you, both in person and online, for joining us in our celebration. And here's to the next 50 years of the NCVS.